Thank you all for coming tonight. This fourth and final performance will be about my grandfather clock and about how I got my last name. So the year was 1960, and grandmother loved to go out dancing with her cousin every single weekend. They would have different bands playing and would do different dances. The room they were in was a giant grand ballroom, and it was so beautiful. So they looked forward to it every single week. One night when they were out dancing, grandmother noticed some man coming up to her, and he asked her if she wanted to dance. She thought to herself, why not? So the two danced the night away, and they were infatuated with one another. It wasn't long before the two became married and had kids of their own, and the early years of their marriage consisted of grandfather away on Navy trips all the time, and my grandmother Marianne was left alone often. When he came back, however, he wasn't the Wilfred that she had met when they first went dancing. He was a totally different man. The relationship quickly became abusive, and he not only abused her, but when they had kids, he abused them too. Marianne desperately wanted to leave, but she couldn't. He had threatened her many times that if she ever tried to leave, that he would track her down and kill not only her, but also the children. Out of fear for her own life and the lives of her children, she stayed. She stayed with Grandpa Clock until one day she finally had the courage to leave. She ran out the door and got the kids in the car and started the ignition quickly right as Grandpa Clock came out with the gun. That's all she heard. The kids that were in the car only remembered the sound of the gun shooting as they drove away. Luckily, everyone in the car survived. Grandpa got a good few shots in, but Grandma just remained on the run from the years that followed. She brought the children to a diner. It was a gas station or a diner. The details are a little fuzzy. But she found a phone book and was going through the pages of the phone book, looking at all the different names. The children just remember sitting there and watching her go through the phone book, and they can't remember exactly how long. Eventually, grandmother stopped on a page, and she looked up at the kids and she said, "Your new last name is going to be O'Brien from now on." And she had each one repeat their new name. She made sure that they remembered that they were no longer Clock and that they would go by the name O'Brien from now on. The years consisted of moving from house to house, running away from Wilfred. He would follow them to wherever they were, whether that was a Wendy's or a gas station or a new location of a house. They kept on the run and never really settled down until they got married of their own. The children, that is. When my dad and mother finally got married, Wilfred continued to follow them also. And he would never actually go in and hurt them or anything, but he would just casually and creepily drive outside their house. And they just remember seeing him back and forth in front of the apartment, never getting out of the car, always just looking up at them. And my dad never remembered anything about the way he looked. He never talked about how tall he was or the shape of his face or his hair for that matter, but all he told me was that he had piercing eyes. He had awful, hateful eyes that just instilled fear into everyone who looked in them. And that's all he remembers of his father. It wasn't long until my parents moved over the mountains from Spokane to Western Washington when the stalking finally stopped from Grandpa. And my dad soon wondered if he was even still alive. He convinced Grandma to give him a social security number so he'd call and check and see if he was getting veterans checks still. Turns out that Grandpa was never actually in the Navy like he claimed to be. Apparently there was a ship that had gone down years and years ago, and all records of the ship were lost at sea. No one knew any of the sailors or the captains that were on that ship for that matter. And so Grandpa seized the opportunity. He went right down to the veterans office and told them that he was the one that was on that ship. So they gave him veterans checks for years and years to come. I think until the rest of his life. And when Dad got the social security number, he called to see if he was getting those veterans checks, and they explained it to him. He also wanted to know if Grandpa was alive still. And so he called up a different person. And when she answered the phone, he explained that he wanted to know if his father was alive or not. And she told him, "Sorry, sir, I can't give you that information." he was like, well, can you at least tell me the last transactions he's made? And she looked it up online and was all of a sudden went really silent on the phone. And my dad asked her, what are you seeing on the computer? And she said, I have never seen anything like this before. She said, sir, there are 4 different pages of names associated with this social security card, social security number. And they're all different variations of Wilfred Lee Clock, but there's not a single Wilfred Lee Clock on here. She's like, I don't know exactly why there's so many names on here, but he is still getting his checks. With confirmation that he was still alive, my dad was satisfied and thoroughly confused, but that's the last he ever heard of grandfather until he passed away about 10 years ago. So there you have it, how I went from a clock to an O'Brien and my very terrifying grandfather.